This is Miguel's workshop, and in this video I use an angle grinder without a guard. I turn perfectly good steel into scrap. I turn my workshop into a cocaine factory, and I make the most beautiful handle. Now, I've had some projects that didn't go well before, but this knife is straight up cussed, but more on that in a minute. Why does stainless steel always arrive like this? Carbon steel arrives clean, rust free. I don't know if it's because it's stainless, it doesn't matter, but it always arrives in this kind of condition. But anyway, first problem that went wrong with this knife is the steel didn't arrive at my house, it arrived at somebody else's house, and I had to track it down. It basically went to a cracked end. I had to take my brother with me, I had him leave the car running, the door open so that I could run out if I was in trouble. This was ridiculous, but it was alright. We got the steel, and nobody died in the process. So one of the things that you can do when you get a big billet of steel like this is, if you're careful about it, you can get 2 knives out of it, or 2 full-size kitchen knives. So you can see I'm drawing basically a poor man's layout here, where I just scribble Sharpie on the steel, scrape a line down the middle, and because it's 50 mils wide, if you cut it down the center, you'll get 25 mils ish if you're good at cutting it anyway. But this is a good way to just get a little more out of the steel than you otherwise would have. And because I'm an idiot, I'm making damn sure that I don't cut in the wrong place. You can see the brain lag there when I had to think about it. Yeah. And now it's just a case of cutting it in half. Best tool for this is the angle grinder. I've never had a guard on this thing. It seems to be very bad form on the internet. I don't know, I found this in a basement. It didn't come with a guard. It hasn't hurt me yet, so I don't know. Now, this sucks. Hacksaw and metal sucks. But it's actually faster than setting up my bandsaw. So hacksaw it is. Now, I bought this bandsaw locally for £100, or if you're in Europe, that is 10,000 post-Brexit euros. So I was quite happy with it. But if I had paid 500 or 600 quid, I would be furious at this little table. It's like 2 mil steel, if that. You can hear it rattling. I mean, just listen to this thing. This has to be about the slowest way that you could cut steel as well. I mean, this is double speed now, and it's not great, but it's very accurate. It's the safest way that you can do it, probably. Definitely safer than an angle grinder without a guard, but it's never hurt me. Painfully slow. And then I'll just clean up the profile, of course, on the belt grinder. Everybody's favourite. Okay, I think we've seen enough. So one of the things that you can do to really distinguish a special knife from a non-special knife, if that's such a thing, is you can do these little decorative spine filings. It doesn't really take too much effort. It takes a little bit of skill, but it's not outlandish. And if you put on a podcast, it can be kind of relaxing. And as always, I'll turn my little notches into half-round notches. And then I'll make little triangles. Now in this one I'm doing 2 triangles per half circle rather than the usual 1 triangle per half circle. So I'm really going all in on this one. But it's what you do when you've got a knife to make for a friend, you know? You give them extra triangles. And then I'll mark everything out with a Sharpie again and use the most satisfying tool in the workshop to mark out my little holes. And once I've drilled these holes and chamfered them, I'll give the knife a clean and then I'll send it off for heat treating. Because my kiln isn't quite ready yet. But once it's back, we'll start with the grinding. And once I get the steel back, I'll start on the bevels. So normally you would do a 45-degree angle until you get to your final thickness, and then you'd work that up to the spine of the steel. But for kitchen knives and stuff that's really thin, I like to leave it a bit thicker on the edge initially, because once you get up to the final grits and you're up to the spine or beyond, you really just need a little bit of extra material to really get those deeper scratches out, you know, from the 36 or 60 grit. And you just keep chipping away at this. Once your 45s are done, you tilt the knife slightly up, and like an old style printer. But the further up the steel that you work the bevel, the thinner the knife will become just by itself. You don't need to calculate angles or anything like that. Now, this is a disaster. You can't see it too well, but this goes all the way through. My steel is split. And I have a very short period of time to get this knife done. So, while I'm kicking myself, I'm going to do a bit of a demonstration on how the bevel works, because it's not actually clear if you just watch somebody at the grinder. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting a 45-degree angle all the way across, basically as if I was making a knife. That's what I would be doing at the grinder. And I've coloured it in so it makes it obvious. So, there's 45 degrees. I've come in at a shallower angle, and I'm just going to file away at this. And this was actually less fun than grinding at the grinder. And so there's my normal 45. I've still got that same angle on the edge here that you can see I haven't touched. But what will happen on the belts is it will kind of lock into this secondary bevel that you've established. Kind of like this. It looks a bit funny, but... So, to take the bevel upwards, you just lean sort of backwards. And to thin out the knife, you sort of lean forwards. And you can see that will start taking away the pen marks. This is the best way I could find to try and describe what's going on. But I think you can see this is basically how the whole thing works. Knife. Your bevel goes. Use that. And the demonstration took so long that we missed almost the entirety of grinding the second knife. This is a 240 grit belt. I'm just taking out the leftover scratches. But you can see how thin this knife is. It really is quite difficult to get these kitchen knives this thin. It's a lot of time at the grinder. There's no way to do it. You can't do it pre-heat treat. You can't forge stainless. Well, you can forge stainless steel, but it's not a good idea. You can see how thin the distal taper is. This ended up being probably one of the best knives I've ever made. And if you do a really good job at the grinder, you'll just need to take a little bit of sandpaper, give it a quick once over, and you'll get a really nice brushed finish, knife will be finished, everything will be perfect.
And there we are.
No, we're actually going to start with the 220 grit EDM stone going diagonally. Then we're going to take a 320 grit stone and go horizontally. And then we're going to take a 600 grit stone and go horizontally again. It's not going to take out the 320 grit scratches, but it is going to smooth them over. And you'll have the benefit of a rough surface that doesn't stick to food too much, but also looks pretty.
And the group kind of just fizzled out to basically nothing by the end of 2016. Now it should be obvious that Tommy is sceptical about the benefits of immigration. To Cyprus, and was tweeting his support for the rioters destroying actually working class people's communities from a £400 a night 5-star hotel with views of the Mediterranean.
Now, if you're wondering why I'm making a leather sheath for a half-finished knife, I had a very short window of time to make this. The crack in the steel really set me back. So what I've done here is I've basically laid out the leather sheath. Then I can take the knife to the engravers. Then I can come back, finish the sheath, and then get my knife back, and then I can put the handle on and do whatever. But to be honest, this might be the way that I do this going forward, because this was so much easier without handle getting in the way. The steel sits flat on the leather. You didn't have to kind of do any guesswork. So now I'll just do the usual. Give myself some layout lines with the calipers. Now, I don't know why I never thought of this before, but I'm using my hot stamp here to put my little castle, my maker's mark, in the leather. And then everything else, I'm just going to do my usual basket weave. Now, if you're wondering what the conversation in the background was there, we were talking about A Clockwork Orange, because I recently watched the movie, and I didn't get it. It's supposed to be one of the best movies of all time. I think they focused a lot on the ultra-violence thing, and they left a lot of philosophy on the table. They could have got really deep into free will, the will to do good, and there was the lingering question that they just never addressed of his choice to do good by taking away his choice to not do good. And I don't know, I just didn't get it. Now, when I was asked to make this knife, I'd shown pictures of Kieranite handles and stuff that I'd done in the past, and I was asked if I could find one that had kind of a goldy kind of a thing, and this is the closest I could find, and I was thinking it was going to be too yellow or not look very good, but I thought, I'll just run with it, and, you know, because you can never tell with handle materials just by looking at pictures, I think. But this is fantastic. It looks terrible now, but it has a really 3D effect. I think it's got actual brass in there, I think, that really shines up and sparkles. It just looked beautiful when it was finished, but it stunk to work with. It smelled worse than Kieranite. In fact, it smelled worse than Kieranite, G10 and spalted maple put together. It was awful. Now I've given myself some layout lines on the G10 liners. I love this stuff. It looks good when it's finished. It's completely impervious to moisture. It's easy to grind, it's tolerant of heat, it won't explode in the dishwasher. Not that you should put your knives in the dishwasher. And most importantly, it arrives flat. I mean, I didn't do anything to these, and they're just both dead flat mating surfaces. So, the first thing I have to do is scuff them up, and then I'm going to glue the liners to the handles. Then I'm going to bore out the holes in the liners, and then I'm going to put the whole thing together. And the reason for that is I'm not using pins for this. Well, I'm using locator pins that are on the inside. They're not massively strong, so you're really relying on the glue to hold everything together. So the more holes you drill and the more surface contact you've got between the outside layer and your steel and the liners, the better the adhesion's going to be. And I've done quite a lot of these. I've never had any problems with it. I'm quite confident in it, but you really have to get as much glue in there as possible. And the surfaces really need to be tight. So, more important than the glue itself, because people argue all the time about G-Flex or BSI or 5-minute epoxy, I don't think there's a massive amount of difference functionally between them. But the most important thing that you can do to make sure that your glue works is clean the surfaces. Get everything covered in white spirit, let it dry. And here's a tip, put Vaseline on anything you don't want the glue to stick to. So on my spine filing there, it's full of Vaseline. It helps me out later. And there's my little pins that go on the inside. They're not going all the way through. They will provide some shear strength to the handle, but it's a kitchen knife. You really aren't going to be battening wood or anything like that with it. And you can see just how much glue is in there. It's covered. You really go through a lot of glue if you do it this way. But if you take a special handle material like this, even though it's synthetic, it still looks really good and there's a lot of effort in there. I just don't want to spoil it with pins. And this is the other half of the reason that you want locator pins. You can see once you've got glue in there, everything just becomes a slip and slide. If you had to try and line that up by eye, it's just, you're going to make your life miserable. You really have to take your opportunity before the glue sets to get it off of anything you don't want it to stick to, because it is a pain otherwise. And you can really ruin the finish of a knife trying to scrape off epoxy. While synthetic materials are fantastic, they're impervious to moisture, they don't break down, they're easy to clean. They are terrible for your lungs when you're grinding them. Look at the amount of particles you can see in the air. It's so much worse than normal wood, and all of this is basically some kind of plastic. And we know about breathing in plastic. You just shouldn't do it. Then I'm going to use the top of my belt grinder to make the handle less of a club and more of something that fits your hand. And this is another thing that you can really do to make your knives special. Especially compared to something like global knives, which everybody seems to like. I hate them. I think they're too heavy, they're too thick. But the handle, I couldn't imagine doing an 8-hour shift getting blisters from that terrible handle. It's not ergonomic. So this is one thing that you can do to make your knife special. And if you thought I was exaggerating about the amount of dust this stuff puts out, it gets absolutely everywhere. Now, if you want polished synthetic handles to look good, you need to do the polishing. The caveat is that this stuff is so soft that although you're going up to 1200 grit or 2400 grit, it really doesn't take much. And this is at the point where I was starting to get really excited, because I can see the metal starting to poke through. I thought it was plastic at first, but it's shiny metal. This is probably my favourite part of the whole knife making process, but it also makes me a bit nervous, because this is where you find out, and once you've sharpened quite a few knives, you get a feel for it. You can feel if the knife is soft, you can feel if the edge is just rolling over, if you've got a soft spot, anything like this. But this is SF100 steel at 61 Rockwell. It's a super tough steel, so you can make this razor thin and not have problems with chipping or it becoming too brittle. But I can feel on the stone that this is going to be a good knife. It's thin, it's taken a really good edge, it's resisting the stone just about the right amount. It's not too hard, but it will hold its edge for a long time. And at this point, I know what the handle looks like. I know it's going to hold a good edge, it's super thin. I'm really excited about this. And so with this one, I chose to dye the sheath black. I used yellow thread so that it matched the handle. The sheath turned out alright. The engraving was done at Art of Engraving in Glasgow. They do fantastic work. They just made it perfect. The most beautiful spine I've ever made on any knife. Look at the fit. There's not a gap in sight. It just works. Now the light here is super flat. It doesn't do the handle justice. It sparkles in the daylight, and the shot with the spine, that's how the handle looks all over. I'm just not good enough at this to get a proper video of it. But yeah, thanks for watching, and take care.